Chapter 191. Who's stronger? Inside a mansion in the Imperial City, there were loud and aggressive shouts, which spread through the atmosphere. At that moment, in the middle of the room stood a robust man. He looked at the crowd of people in front of him and shouted, "You're all a bunch of good-for-nothings." When the crowd of people heard him insulting them, ugly expressions appeared on their faces. A cold and sharp chi emerged in the atmosphere and rushed towards the robust man. "Blade!" shouted that robust man. He immediately raised his hand and released his blade energy. An illusionary blade appeared in the air. Boom! The person who was closest to the robust man was blown away and a bloody mist filled the air. That blade was ruthless. The others immediately rushed towards the robust man in an attack formation. They all looked cold and ruthless. They unsheathed their swords and thrust them at the robust man's heart. Blade. The robust man was standing tall and upright like a mountain. In the atmosphere, an incomparably strong blade force emerged. The most frightening thing was that above the robust man, an illusory blade was flashing. It was unceasingly absorbing blade energy from the atmosphere and was ready to attack anyone that approached. His entire body looked like an extremely strong blade. Anyone in his way would be killed. Immediately after, the whole crowd of people was blown backwards. They were trying to charge at the robust man, but they were all now lying on the floor even farther away from him. They were unable to get close to him. Blood was flowing endlessly onto the floor beneath them. From the beginning to the end, the robust man was standing in the same location. "All right," shouted a voice from behind the crowd. The crowd turned around and saw that someone had arrived. It was Lin Feng and he was smiling. Lin Feng hadn't thought that Ba Dao would train them with such brutality while he wasn't there. His methods were vicious and cruel. The blade energy around his body was piercingly sharp. These people hated Ba Dao to the bone. But of course, this was because he had been making them suffer every day. How could they not hate him to the bone? Ba Dao watched Lin Feng arrive. His pupils shrank while staring at Lin Feng, and he said, "You have broken through to the 6th Ling Qi layer. I broke through to the 6th Ling Qi layer recently. Now I am at the same level as you," said Lin Feng while nodding. These Yun Hai sect disciples were astonished. Surprisingly, Ba Dao and Lin Feng's cultivation were both at the same level. How powerful! Back in the days at the Yun Hai sect, they remembered that Lin Feng had broken through to the 2nd Ling Qi layer. A year hadn't passed, yet he had already broken through to the 6th Ling Qi layer. His cultivation speed was terrifying. For ordinary people with ordinary talent who had broken through to the Ling Qi layer, it required at least 1 to several years to break through to the next one. Lin Feng's natural talent was too monstrous, but Ba Dao's strength was also unfathomable and mysterious. It seemed like Ba Dao could even defeat people of the 7th Ling Qi layer. Even though Lin Feng was at a similar cultivation level, his strength couldn't be compared with that of Ba Dao. Ba Dao was staring at Lin Feng. Surprisingly, a sharp chi emerged from his body and moved towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng was a bit surprised but then smiled and said, "You want to try against me?" "Yes," said Ba Dao while slightly nodding. Ba Dao had practiced the skill tyrannical blade. He was perfectly aware that he had become stronger. Before, nobody of the 6th Ling Qi dared fight against him. At that moment, he had become even stronger and was convinced that he could defeat any cultivator of the 7th Ling Qi layer. Therefore, when he saw that Lin Feng had broken through to the 6th Ling Qi layer and the battle energy that was emerging from his body, he felt like comparing their strength. "All right, we can have an exchange," replied Lin Feng while smiling. The disciples of the Yun Hai sect were stupefied. Excitement appeared in their eyes. Such a battle. Who was going to be victorious? The robust and strong Ba Dao or the genius of the Yun Hai sect, the new patriarch, Lin Feng? Ba Dao and Lin Feng were fixedly gazing at each other. At that moment, a powerful blade energy spread in the atmosphere. The blade was truly a powerful weapon. Ba Dao loved blades and he had a blade spirit. The tyrannical blade that Lin Feng had given to him was truly terrifying in his hands. The blade energy that he was releasing emitted whistling sounds as it chopped through the air. The disciples of the Yun Hai sect had the feeling that their bodies were being drowned in an endless ocean of blade energy and that they would be cut into pieces at any moment. How terrifying! When he was fighting against us, he was hiding his real power. The hearts of the people in the crowd were pounding. It seemed like Lin Feng would be unable to win against Ba Dao. That blade energy could easily kill a cultivator of the 6th Ling Qi layer. One blade attack would be enough. Even though the crowd knew that Lin Feng had extremely high natural talent, they doubted the fact that he could resist Ba Dao's attacks. At that moment, an insanely powerful battle energy emerged from Lin Feng's body, and in the blink of an eye, it was already at a level that could compete with Ba Dao's blade energy. Lin Feng was intensely staring at Ba Dao. His body was covered with battle energy. It seemed like he was going to attack at any moment. A hurricane-like wind moved towards Lin Feng, which made his tattered clothes flutter. He was standing there like an invincible, unmoving rock. How powerful! In the middle of Ba Dao's blade force, Lin Feng was just standing there. He wasn't moving backwards at all. He was just as strong as Ba Dao. At that moment, Ba Dao started to move. In a flash, his blade energy struck the floor and a deep crack appeared as if it had been cut by a blade. The blade is the weapon of the kings. Divine protection and divine attacks, said Ba Dao. After expressing his opinion about blades, an even stronger blade energy spread through the air. The entire crowd had the feeling that they were suffocating under the pressure. The whistling sounds were growing more intense and occurring much more often. I understand why Tyrannical Blade is a skill of the D level. The blade energy emerging from his body is incredibly powerful, thought Lin Feng. At that moment, Ba Dao's entire body was like a giant blade that had just been unsheathed. Boom! Lin Feng took a step forward. His battle energy didn't decrease, and on the contrary, it became even stronger. It looked like it was overcoming the heavens and the earth. The sword is the weapon of the emperor. It can pierce even the heavens. Lin Feng used a similar description to that of Ba Dao. Lin Feng's force spread in the atmosphere like a brutal flood. Force, sword force. It could destroy and annihilate everything in its path. In a flash, his sword force fused with his battle energy and spread through the air. The crowd was astonished. Indeed, Ba Dao could use blade force, but Lin Feng could use sword force. His sword was made for destruction. Not only was Lin Feng's sword force extremely powerful, but his battle energy was terrifying too. The blade energy, as well as the sword and battle energy, was filling the atmosphere, and suddenly, they collided against each other. There were small crackling noises as the energies clashed. How terrifying! At that moment, the backs of the Yun Hai sect disciples were covered with cold sweat. Ba Dao was monstrously strong, but Lin Feng was not any weaker. They hadn't even started fighting yet and the people in the crowd already had their clothes soaked with sweat. They were uncontrollably shaking and retreating. Ba Dao and Lin Feng were still staring at each other. A long time seemed to have elapsed, and a light flashed through Ba Dao's eyes. At that moment, his blade energy slowly started to vanish. On the other hand, Lin Feng's sword energy continued moving forwards. Ba Dao suddenly looked surprised and slowly opened his mouth. I admit defeat. When he finished talking, the blade force around his body instantly disappeared. Lin Feng's sword and battle energy also disappeared. After all the energy disappeared, the crowd started to relax, and they all took a deep breath. Their hearts were all pounding. Lin Feng was terrifying and was even stronger than Ba Dao. No wonder he had become the patriarch of the Yun Hai sect. Ba Dao, now your blade force has become extremely monstrous. Wait until you have a breakthrough in force mastery. Lin Feng said this while smiling. They had not taken that battle seriously, as they were just testing each other. Ba Dao was clearly not as strong as Lin Feng. When Ba Dao heard Lin Feng, he was stupefied. He stared at him and said, You have already broken through to the next force mastery? A while ago, replied Lin Feng calmly. Ba Dao was dumbstruck. Lin Feng could already use energy attacks. What a terrifying young man. Fortunately, Lin Feng had never challenged him in the prisoner arena. Otherwise, he would not have kept his undefeated record. Ba Dao, I came here to tell you to get prepared. We may have to travel to join the war at any moment, said Lin Feng indifferently, and then he immediately looked at the Yun Hai sect disciples. He then said, you guys should always listen to Ba Dao and train hard. If you do, your chances of surviving on the battlefield will be better. When Lin Feng finished talking, he turned around and left at full speed. Chapter 192, Cold Sword. At the Celestial Academy, there was a great deal of excitement. People were walking in all directions and talking as if they were excitedly discussing about something. I wouldn't have thought that the Imperial City would send an army to Duan Ren City. Could it be that the attack of the Mo Yu country is so strong that Duan Ren City is already unable to resist anymore? Said someone in a low voice on the main street of the academy. That person heaved a sigh. It was one of the military students of the academy. He had always revered Liu Kang Lan. He wouldn't have thought that these days, Liu Kang Lan would also be unable to resist. It's probably the situation. Otherwise, they would have secretly sent students of some big institutions to practice there. They wouldn't have declared a state of war. This time, the Imperial City has given the order to send the most outstanding disciples to Duan Ren City as well as the real army, replied the other person. These two people were hurriedly walking as they spoke. These two students were walking in the same direction as many other groups of students. At that moment, there were people wearing silver armor riding horses outside of the academy. They looked majestic and strong. In front of these people were the students of the Celestial Academy. They were riding horses as well, and some were even riding ferocious beasts. They were waiting to leave. At that moment, a horse galloping could be heard in the distance. A white silhouette appeared and was galloping toward that location at full speed. White clothes, white horse. Wen Ao Shui. When the crowd saw the face, which was as beautiful as any woman, the crowd was stupefied. Wen Ao Shui was leaving with them as well. Slow. The white horse neighed while it slowed down, and Wen Ao Shui glanced at the crowd while smiling. Immediately after, he arrived amongst the military students who slowly parted and created a path for him to lead the way. Next to them, the leader of the army troops glanced at Wen Ao Shui in a cold and detached way and asked, Wen Ao Shui, why do you want to go to such a place? Luo Yu, if you can go, for what reason can I not go? Asked Wen Ao Shui while smiling. His beautiful eyes looked enchanting. Luo Yu groaned and didn't look at Wen Ao Shui again. He turned his head towards the officer of the silver-armored troops and said, the time has come for us to leave. Let's go. All right, said the officer indifferently while nodding. Prepare to leave. But at that moment, the sound of galloping spread in the air again. Inside the academy, a group of armored horses were galloping at full speed while a cloud of dust rose behind them. The one at the very front was a very handsome young man. He looked majestic and powerful. He was galloping there at an incredible speed. His horse, surprisingly, was a dragon colt horse, a horse of extremely high quality. On the young man's left and right, there was a single person on each side. One of them was a girl wearing a fine veil on her face. She looked holy and pure, like a celestial being. On his other side was a beautiful woman. She looked heroic and vigorous. But many people were astonished when they saw the young man on the dragon colt horse. It was Lin Feng. These days, at the Celestial Academy, people who didn't know his name were rare. The fact that he was appearing at that moment was amazing. Lin Feng was also going to Duan Ren City. He was personally going to go to the battlefield. Besides, two beautiful women were following him. You arrived, said Wen Ao Shui while smiling at Lin Feng. Lin Feng nodded to Wen Ao Shui. Of course, he had arrived. He was leaving as well. At that moment, That noble military man, Luo Yu, looked at Lin Feng and said in a low voice, "Lin Feng." Lin Feng looked at Luo Yu wondering who he was. He didn't know him. "What's the problem?" asked Lin Feng. "Nothing," said Luo Yu while shaking his head. He then continued, "You defeated He Mo only because you're lucky. I hope that, on the battlefield, you will remain that lucky because it is not a place where you can just play around." When he finished talking, Luo Yu turned around, didn't look at Lin Feng again and started moving. Lucky? Lin Feng was stupefied. He defeated He Mo because he was lucky? Lin Feng laughed and shouted at Luo Yu. "Same for you. It would be a great shame if you didn't come back alive." When Luo Yu heard Lin Feng, he stopped his horse. He released a cold energy from his body which moved towards Lin Feng. At the same time, he turned around and galloped towards Lin Feng at full speed while punching towards Lin Feng, which emitted a strong whistling noise as it pierced through the air. Boom! Lin Feng's horse neighed, and Lin Feng flew up in the air before landing on the ground. There was blood on the corner of his mouth. He then kicked the dragon colt horse, which had immediately fell down onto the ground while unceasingly neighing, causing him to be dismounted. From the moment when Lin Feng had talked and the end of that attack, only a short moment had elapsed. Luo Yu's attack had been like a storm, quick and perfect. While looking at Lin Feng, Luo Yu laughed coldly and said, "Did you think that I was like He Mo and that you could act so impudently in front of me?" The crowd was astonished and amazed by Luo Yu's move. He was so strong. Even though Lin Feng was monstrously gifted and could defeat He Mo, the difference with Luo Yu was gigantic. Luo Yu was the 7th ranked student of the Celestial Academy. He Mo and him were very different. Luo Yu didn't need to use a special skill to have the strength of the 7th Qi layer. At that moment, the crowd saw Lin Feng standing with blood on the corner of his mouth. He was standing perfectly straight, and a glow emerged around his body. In his hand appeared a sword which glowed with a silvery white light. It looked extremely sharp. It was absorbing sword energy as if it was alive. An incredible amount of battle energy spread in the atmosphere from Lin Feng's body. It was extremely sharp and powerful. Everybody was instantly terrified. Besides, inside that battle energy, there was sword qi. The crowd was stupefied and looking at Lin Feng in a strange way. Lin Feng surprisingly wanted to fight? Luo Yu frowned while looking at Lin Feng. He was surprised. He only saw that Lin Feng was walking slowly. In the blink of an eye, the battle energy as well as the sword qi immediately emerged and pierced through the air at full speed, moving straight towards Luo Yu. At that moment, a loud neighing sound spread in the air. Luo Yu's horse had felt the energy and was terrified. It immediately fell onto the ground and started crawling. Luo Yu's body was thrown onto the ground. "You cowardly animal!" coldly shouted Luo Yu. He immediately attacked like a madman. His horse neighed and immediately after, its heart twitched, it wasn't moving anymore. Immediately after, Luo Yu raised his head and looked at Lin Feng. An extremely cold expression could be seen in his eyes. Without saying anything, Lin Feng walked towards Luo Yu, and when he arrived in front of him then raised his sword above his head. An extremely powerful combination of battle energy, sword energy and deadly energy filled the air. The hearts of the people in the crowd were pounding. It seemed like Lin Feng had become much stronger in comparison with when he fought against He Mo, much stronger. Lin Feng hadn't stuck with his sword yet, but the sword energy was already enough to make the heart of the people in the crowd beat faster. Each of Lin Feng's actions was enough to astonish them. "Die!" Lin Feng said one word and swung his sword in a downwards arc towards Luo Yu. It seemed like that sword was going to reach Luo Yu's body at any moment. Deadly qi waves were rolling in the air like a black cloud. Luo Yu looked concentrated. A terrifying qi emerged from his body. When he saw Lin Feng's sword approaching him, Luo Yu raised his hands, out of which a bright and resplendent white light emerged. A terrifying strength flowed from within his hands. A distinct cracking sound spread through the air. The bright white light disintegrated under Lin Feng's sword. The silver deadly sword immediately continued moving towards Luo Yu. Luo Yu's facial expression finally changed. He was dumbstruck. He heavily stepped on the ground and raised both of his hands. He quickly moved backwards. That sword caught his face, leaving a thread of blood down his face. That sword had nearly cut him into two. But Luo Yu didn't have the time to take a breath. He just saw Lin Feng flicker and come towards him again. That deadly sword was rushing towards him again. Lin Feng and his sword were the same, expressionless and cold. It made Luo Yu's heart feel extreme dread. Chapter 193. Cowardly Dog. He moved again. Luo Yu didn't dare approach Lin Feng's sword. The sword has both battle and deadly energy fusing together. Each time, Lin Feng's attacks were filled with what seemed like endless power. Luo Yu would get pierced right through if he approached too near to Lin Feng's sword. His heart was filled with remorse. He hadn't thought that Lin Feng would be so strong. Luo Yu had broken through to the 7th Ling Qi layer. If he wanted to attack someone, he did it without thinking much about their retaliation. Boom! Lin Feng pierced the atmosphere at incredible speed. An extremely sharp and violent wind emerged. A horse in the distance neighed and was surprisingly caught by the wind and was cut into pieces while the person who was thrown backwards. He was breathing heavily, but he didn't dare say a word. He feared that Lin Feng would attack him if he did. That person had seen what happened with Luo Yu and Lin Feng with his own eyes. Luo Yu had attacked Lin Feng while being very aggressive towards him, but Lin Feng hadn't bothered to waste any words on him. He had immediately started talking with his sword, and at that moment, Luo Yu was in a critical situation. Lin Feng was really going to kill him. When seeing that, how could a person willingly provoke Lin Feng? They did not have death wishes. Lin Feng's deadly sword was quickly piercing through the air. The battle energy emerging from his body was becoming stronger with each passing moment. He looked cold and expressionless as he was carrying out his sword strikes. Luo Yu didn't have a single chance to strike back against him. At that moment, Luo Yu looked extremely pale. He was surprisingly struggling to keep his life, and on top of that, in front of so many people. Luo Yu shouted furiously. His clothes were still fluttering through the air. He looked furious and ice cold. "What the hell are you doing?" coldly asked Lin Feng when he heard Luo Yu shout. He then continued striking with his sword. All of the energy within the atmosphere suddenly disappeared. Luo Yu was surprised, but suddenly looked extremely happy. He then released an extremely powerful energy along with his spirit, which appeared behind him. However, at that moment, Luo Yu had a bad premonition which made his heart beat faster. There wasn't any sword force anymore, but that sword seemed even more dangerous than before. The battle energy from moments before had also disappeared. Luo Yu quickly retreated at full speed. Luo Yu had barely avoided the sword, but the energy had struck him. Luo Yu's clothes were torn and there was blood pouring from his chest and a wound on his throat. It was a shocking sight. The crowd was astonished. What a sharp sword! What a terrifying and strong strength! Luo Yu lowered his head and looked at his own chest. Immediately after, a hideous expression appeared on his face. He raised his head and looked at Lin Feng again. Flames of rage were burning in his eyes. However, Lin Feng looked as cold as before. He raised his sword again as he spoke. "I am going to personally kill you." Luo Yu was shocked. He turned around and started retreating at full speed. He didn't feel like fighting against Lin Feng any longer anymore. Lin Feng laughed coldly. He moved forward and used his sword to strike towards Luo Yu again. When Luo Yu felt the deadly energy approaching from behind, he gnashed his teeth. In spite of the fact that he was insanely shaking, he continued running away like mad. What a shameless and cowardly dog, to run after talking arrogantly. Lin Feng didn't continue chasing him. While holding his sword towards Luo Yu, he shouted, "I don't think that you can be compared with He Mo. In my eyes, you cannot even come close to He Mo." Pray that we never cross paths again." When Luo Yu heard Lin Feng's words, his injuries started to bleed heavily as his heart pounded with fury and fear at the same time. It seemed like the state of his wounds were quite serious, but he didn't dare to stop running. He continued running away like mad into the distance. When Luo Yu's silhouette disappeared, the crowd's eyes fell upon Lin Feng. They were astonished and amazed. On that day, when Lin Feng had fought against He Mo, the crowd did not see that Lin Feng had almost killed He Mo. However, at that moment, they had clearly seen that Luo Yu, who was even more powerful and arrogant, decided to offend Lin Feng and immediately after injured him. Lin Feng did not continue with his words and instead used his sword, and the result was that Luo Yu, who considered himself above Lin Feng, had run away like a coward. 2 months after defeating He Mo, Lin Feng had defeated a military student of the 7th Ling Qi layer. Lin Feng's natural talent was monstrous. Lin Feng sheathed his sword and immediately returned to his colt dragon horse. He then said indifferently, "Let's go." These army troops nodded to the order, and immediately after, everybody started galloping at full speed and disappeared from the crowd's vision. But that insane battle from a moment ago was still in their minds. The area outside of the northern gate of the imperial city was desolate. The ground was filled with yellowish mud without any grass. The northern gate of the city wasn't a normal gate. People couldn't go through it as they pleased. In times of peace, only those who had received a military order could go through that gate. In that depopulated and desolate place, there were many tents. They had been set up by the military troops. The area was incredibly vast. There was a crowd of people that had gathered outside of the tents, about 100 meters away. Amongst them were the noble cultivators, military troops and certain military troops wearing silver armor. All of these noble cultivators belonged to the holy courtyard of Shui Yu. They were heading to war so they could acquire knowledge and battle experience. Their future would be even better if they achieved military merits. Of course, many people were going to there to acquire battle experience and to become stronger through life and death situations. Those types of people were both hot-blooded and courageous. From a distance they could already hear the galloping of horses. The ground was shaking. The people in the crowd outside of the tents could already distinctly feel the ground shake. A short time after, they could already see a large group of people heading towards them. They have arrived. The crowd outside of the tents was looking at the newcomers with a sharp expression in their eyes. At the same time, amongst the crowd outside of the tents, a young man who was sitting on the seat of the general stood up and went to welcome the newcomers. He had a warm smile on his face. The newcomers got down off their horses when they saw the young man who was coming towards them to welcome them. They all kneeled down and shouted, "Your Highness, you have gone through many hardships to be here," said the young man to these people while smiling and nodding. He waved his hands as a gesture that they could stand up. They were all scared. Their hearts were racing. Even though His Highness was a prince, he wasn't arrogant at all and was very easy to get along with. He was also very polite to these ordinary military troops. "Your Highness," said one of the members of the Celestial Academy very loudly. Duan Wu Ya smiled at the crowd and said, "Everybody, I am lucky that you have come to fight with me. This is truly a stroke of luck. Don't mention it, Your Highness. Come, let's sit. I'll give the instructions to the troops and then we can go." Duan Wu Ya politely while he showed everyone where they could sit. Everybody had an attributed seating area. The people of the Celestial Academy could sit on the right. There was a great number of seats laid out for them. The people of the Celestial Academy sat down. At that moment, many people were sharply glaring at them, which surprised them. Opposite them were the people from the holy courtyard of Shui Yu. At that moment, Lin Feng was also looking at the people from the holy courtyard of Shui Yu. When he noticed that many people were looking at him, he narrowed his eyes. Duan Han, Yu Tian Chen, Lin Qian, he could recognize many people amongst them. The military apprentices of the Celestial Academy were not the only people who wanted to go to war. There were also some noble cultivators, as well as some ordinary cultivators who wanted to go to war to enhance their path of cultivation. It would enable them to have an official career and to rapidly rise up in the world. Relying on their strength and efforts, they would be able to return home as triumphant heroes. But Lin Feng clearly felt that someone was staring at him with an even sharper glare. It wasn't an ordinary person from the crowd, it was their leader. He was sitting next to Duan Wu Ya, Duan Tian Lang. When Lin Feng saw that their leader Duan Tian Lang was the one who was staring dagger at him, he was astonished. Duan Tian Lang, apart from being a member of the Duan clan, he was also now the commander-in-chief of the country. Chapter 194. The War Drums. Officers and soldiers gradually arrived at the military drill ground in their formations. There wasn't any disorder, in the slightest degree. Only the sound of their synchronized march and of the clanging noises from their armor could be heard. Lin Feng's heart started to beat faster when he saw the officers and soldiers within the military drill ground. He looked as far as his eyes could see and saw that there were 3 large groups of soldiers which gradually turned into 3 huge square-shaped formations. There wasn't the slightest iota of chaos. The light from the sun shining on their armor was dazzling. There were 3 different colors shining throughout the formation. The armor of these soldiers were 3 different colors: bronze, silver and gold. The gold-armored soldiers were the highest ranked while the bronze-armored soldiers were the lowest of rank. That was clear from just a glance. Duan Tian Lang's armor was pitch black. He looked like the devourer of souls. His attire was filled with endless coldness and austerity. He looked intimidating and majestic. Clang, clang, clang. The marching sounds of the soldiers rose and fell in succession. A row of bronze-armored soldiers lifted their war drums and walked forwards. The war drums were so heavy that 4 bronze-armored soldiers were required to lift a single drum. Boom! A deep sound spread through the atmosphere. The front row of bronze-armored soldiers lifted up the war drums and moved towards the other soldiers. Then the second row of bronze-armored soldiers did the same. When the drums hit the floor, however, there was a huge crashing sound followed by a slight tremor. In total, there were 5 rows and each of them had 9 war drums. What is that? Lin Feng was surprised. He didn't know what these bronze-armored soldiers were doing with the war drums. However, other people were indifferently watching the scene as if it was completely normal. Excitement also sparkled in all of their eyes. Today, the students of 2 big institutions as well as some other student cultivators have joined us in this war. We beat these drums for all the students. Besides, there is something else I want to announce today. Duan Tian Lang will be joining us as the chief commander. My sister, Duan Xin Yi, will be joining as vice chief commander. She will also be present on the battlefield. Today, it is for all these people that we beat the drums. Besides, the people who can make more drumbeats than the others can become the protectors of Princess Duan Xin Yi, said Duan Wu Ya. Immediately after, from the middle of the troops, a beautiful silhouette appeared. Even though she was wearing armor, one could see her beautiful figure. That was the Imperial Princess Duan Xin Yi. The crowd was surprised. The Princess Duan Xin Yi was acting as the vice chief commander? What was the reason she had come to this battle? Regardless of the reason why things had turned out this way, these young men were excited. The ones who could make the most drumbeats could become the princess's personal guards, which meant that they would constantly be accompanying her. Such opportunities were really rare. Lin Feng seemed perplexed. Duan Tian Lang was the chief commander? Lin Feng didn't understand what relations there were between Duan Wu Ya and Duan Tian Lang. Besides, Duan Xin Yi was the vice chief commander. What was this supposed to mean? 5 people. Who will come first? Shouted Duan Tian Lang. Immediately after, silhouettes flickered and immediately arrived in front of the war drums while saying, "I am willing to start first." In the blink of an eye, there was a great deal of people in front of the war drums. 5 people moved at the same time. They released an incredible quantity of piercingly cold chi. Boom! Someone brutally punched the war drum, which emitted a slight buzzing sound, but it didn't emit the sound of a drumbeat. Besides, some energy bounced from it and was reflected back to the attacked, which knocked them backwards. At that moment, that person looked extremely embarrassed and blushed. They lowered their head and went back to their seat. They had been unable to make the drums beat. The second person looked imposing and majestic. With an insane strength, he punched at one drum, which emitted a buzzing sound and then a light cracking beat. That person looked very excited. Without stopping at all, he directly moved to another drum and punched it. It made a crackle sound again, which filled people with enthusiasm. Making the war drums emit any sounds was already extremely difficult. Making the drums emit even cracking sounds could improve the soldiers' morale. Only those who had a high status like the officers would be able to beat war drums. Those who could make the most drums beats would be adored by both officers and soldiers. But that same man didn't manage to make the third war drum emit a sound. The man suddenly looked dispirited and depressed. After that, the third person managed to make 3 drums emit a sound. The fourth person managed to make 2 drums emit sound, and the fifth person also only managed to make only 3 drums emit sound. They then went back to their respective seats. The bronze-armored soldiers put the war drums back in order. As before, there were 5 rows of soldiers with 9 war drums in each row. Lin Feng looked pensive and was intensely gazing at the war drums. He had the impression that these war drums followed a regular pattern. In other words, he had the impression they matched a person's cultivation level. For example, someone of the second Ling Chi layer could make 2 drums beat. Someone of the third could make 3 drums beat, so making 9 war drums beat required to be at the 9th Ling Chi layer. Of course, it didn't seem to be an absolute rule either. A moment ago, someone of the third Ling Chi layer had only made 2 drums beat, while the first one was only at the first Ling Chi layer and hadn't managed to make any drum emit a sound. Next one, said Duan Wu Ya while smiling at the crowd. All go, said Yuan Shan, who was sitting next to Lin Feng while standing up and going towards the war drums. Yuan Shan, brother, all go too, said Duan Feng following Yuan Shan. A short moment after, 5 people had gathered around the drums. Amongst these 5 people, the strongest one had broken through to the 4th Ling Chi layer. They managed to make 4 drums beat and then walked away while smiling. Yuan Shan was at the 3rd Ling Chi layer and managed to make 3 drums beat. Besides, Duan Feng managed to surprise everybody. He had broken through to the 2nd Ling Chi layer but managed to make 3 drums beat as well. Many people started looking at him with new eyes. Many people tried, but the best person could make only 4 drums beat. At that moment, a silhouette stood up and said to the students of the Celestial Academy, "I am Tu Fu of the Holy Courtyard of Shui Yu. Who will accompany me?" Tu Fu. When Lin Feng saw that big guy, he was astonished. They used to be fellow sect disciples in the past. Tu Fu also used to be from the Yun Hai sect. Now, he was a student at the Holy Courtyard of Shui Yu. The crowd was suddenly interested. The Holy Courtyard of Shui Yu had started provoking the students of the Celestial Academy. "Are there only cowards at the Celestial Academy?" said Tu Fu when he saw that nobody was replying to him. He couldn't help but laugh. "Not only are you a shameless turncoat, but you also dare to speak such nonsense," said Lin Feng, coldly surprising Tu Fu, who immediately looked at him. "The winners can have a prosperous life while the losers can only die. The weak are the prey of the strong. That is the main rule on the path of cultivation. When Duan Tian Lang annihilated the Yun Hai sect, of course I followed him. That is just common sense," shouted Tu Fu coldly. Then, while staring at Lin Feng, he added, "Lin Feng, if you want to join the Holy Courtyard, you can go and beg Duan Tian Lang. Maybe then he will take care of you." "Oh, you have now become a cowardly turncoat whose devotion to righteousness really inspires reverence," said Lin Feng coldly while looking at Tu Fu. He then turned around, looked at someone wearing a bronze mask and said, "You go." "All right," replied the person, wearing the bronze mask, while slightly nodding. He then looked at Tu Fu and said, "I am coming." When he finished talking, his silhouette instantly appeared in front of the war drums. Tu Fu's facial expression was gloomy. He then quickly arrived next to the war drums and said, "Who will start?" "You can start," indifferently said the person wearing the bronze mask. Tu Fu slightly nodded. His silhouette started moving and immediately moved forwards. Boom! A drum beat spread through the air, resonating in people's ears. The war drum had been smashed into pieces. Tu Fu was unceasingly moving, insanely punching the war drums. The second and the third war drums were instantly crushed, emitting explosion sounds in the air. Tu Fu had used one breath to do that. He shouted loudly and continued punching. The fourth war drum was crushed. Crack! Tu Fu's was violently stepping on the ground as he punched the drums. He then made a beat from the fifth war drum, which nobody had managed to do until that moment. After, as if Tu Fu had a surplus of strength, moved towards the sixth war drum. The sixth war drum was unceasingly vibrating, but at that moment, his strength bounced on the war drum and blew Tu Fu's body 100 meters backwards, but there was already a small crack on the war drum as well. Fifth Ling Chi layer and almost made the sixth one emit a beat. Worth being called a former disciple of the Yun Hai sect. Too bad that he's a shameless turncoat, said Lin Feng in a low voice when he saw the crack that appeared on the sixth war drum. A cultivator of the fifth Ling Chi layer was nothing in Lin Feng's eyes. Ba Dao was going to teach him a good lesson. Chapter 195. The Song. Everybody was looking at Tu Fu. Even though he was pushed back by the last war drum attempt, nobody was going to look down on him. Being able to emit a cracking noise from the sixth drum was already a great performance. The people of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu were looking at Ba Dao with cold smiles on their faces. They wanted to see how the man, who was wearing a bronze mask, was supposed to compete with Tu Fu. At that moment, Ba Dao moved in front of a war drum. He looked calm and mystical. An incredible blade energy rose from his body. The crowd was stupefied. Immediately after, they only saw Ba Dao's fist move towards the first war drum. Boom! A clear sound spread in the air. However, it didn't sound brutal and explosive at all. The war drum looked like a bean curd that had been split open by a blade. Immediately after, he struck the second, then the third and the fourth one. He had easily made them beat. From the beginning, Ba Dao had done this in a single breath. He moved straight towards the fifth one, slightly raised his hand and immediately after cut it into two distinct parts which flew away. As before, he looked relaxed and detached. The scariest part was that Ba Dao looked like a blade that would cut through anything, even before arriving at the sixth drum. Looking like a terrifying blade, Ba Dao cut the sixth war drum. As before, it looked easy for him to emit the beat and it seemed like he had destroyed those 6 drums in a single fluid movement, without taking a second breath. At that moment, Ba Dao stopped. He didn't move towards the 7th war drum and no longer looked interested. He calmly turned around and walked back towards the people of the Celestial Academy. "A piece of trash dares to act so arrogantly," said Ba Dao indifferently. Everybody was astonished. That guy surprisingly dared to call Tu Fu a piece of trash. However, in comparison with Ba Dao, Tu Fu was extremely weak indeed. Tu Fu pulled a long face and the color drained from his cheeks. In the past, he used to be considered as a genius within the Yun Hai sect. He used to consider himself as an amazing cultivator. At the holy courtyard of Shuiyu, he was considered as an important student, but at that moment, he was being humiliated and had no way to refute Ba Dao. He had needed his maximal strength to make a crack appear in the 6th war drum, but Ba Dao had easily been able to make it beat as he split it in two. The difference between the two of them was gigantic. "Not bad," said Duan Wu Ya while smiling. He then continued, "Are there any stronger ones out there?" The people in the crowd were looking at each other in dismay. After that, many others stood up to test their strength. They all tried, but eventually, they all failed, unable to even reach the sixth war drum. Ling Hu, you are one the strongest here. Why don't you go and destroy their honor? At that moment, on the side of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu, Tu Fu said while looking at Ling Hu Hishan. Ling Hu Hishan used to be a disciple of the Yunhai sect, so he and Tu Fu had a good relationship. Ling Hu Hishan slightly shook his head and looked at the crowd on the other side. That guy in white clothes, his name is Wen Ao Shui. He is ranked 3rd at the Celestial Academy. He's discreet and his strength is unfathomable. I hadn't thought that he would come as well, so now I am not entirely sure that I can win. Ling Hu Hishan's words stupefied Tu Fu. Immediately after, he walked towards Wen Ao Shui, who was as beautiful as woman, and saw that these two enigmatic eyes were also looking towards him. They looked like dazzling diamonds. Tu Fu didn't dare look at them anymore. Amongst those who came to the battlefield, the strongest student of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu was Ling Hu Hishan. If Ling Hu Hishan took action, Wen Ao Shui would inevitably get involved, and if Lin Hu Hishan was defeated, the holy courtyard of Shuiyu would lose face. Therefore, Ling Hu Hishan wasn't absolutely certain about the result of a potential confrontation and preferred not to get involved. I will help gain back our prestige, said someone on the side of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. That young man was Yu Tianchen. Yu Tianchen stood up, looked at Duan Wuya and Duan Xinyi and said, "Your Highness, I am obviously the one who should protect the princess. Nobody else can even pretend to be better suited than me," said Yu Tianchen in an extremely arrogant tone. Everybody could see that Yu Tianchen believed the logic of his words. Yu Tianchen was a member of the Yu clan and he had an extremely high social status. Besides, he was also extremely strong, already reaching the 7th Ling Qi layer, and possessed a terrifying spirit to match. Many people, who were stronger than him, didn't dare to provoke him, while those who were weaker than him were only there to be bullied. Duan Xinyi lowered her head without saying anything, whereas Duan Wuya faintly smiled and said, "Well, let's see how many war drums you can handle, brother." Yu Tianchen slightly nodded but didn't walk towards the drums. Instead, he looked at the students of the Celestial Academy, in particular in Lin Feng's direction, and said, "In order to be in a relationship with a princess, no matter if you're a cultivation genius or if you were born from a noble family, you need to stand at the absolute peak. Those who have a low social status and an overrated strength are just nobodies. When they think that they have a chance to win the heart of the princess, it truly is the funniest thing in the world. Those types of people can keep dreaming." When he finished, he walked towards the drums. The crowd was looking at Lin Feng with a strange look. Even though Yu Tianchen hadn't mentioned any names, he was clearly talking about Lin Feng. Lin Feng was trying to gain relations with the princess? At that moment, Lin Feng was dumbstruck. His facial expression looked slightly cold. Lin Feng had an exaggerated strength and was interested in the princess? At that moment, Yu Tianchen said, "Today, I would like to sing a song for the princess." When he finished talking, Tian Yu Chen's deep and low voice spread through the air. Men and officers of the vast and boundless Shuiyu, beat the drums and sound the gongs. Boom! An explosion followed Yu Tianchen's song as the first war drumbeat. Lords and nobles wearing armor and inspiring ambitions. Boom! With a single explosive beat he destroyed 2 war drums. A hot-blooded man surrounded by lakes and mountains. Yu Tianchen's voice was deep. The energy he was releasing matched the feeling of hot-blooded behavior. He continued to punch the next drums. The 4th and the 5th war drums exploded into pieces. Not only was it Yu Tianchen's first breath, but he still had plenty of air in his lungs. Achieving 1,000 heroic merits, Yu Tianchen continued walking forwards. It seemed like his entire body was defying the laws of space and time, and that his strength could annihilate everything in his path. An incredibly loud explosion sound filled the atmosphere, and the 6th war drum exploded. At that moment, Yu Tianchen stamped on the ground like a madman. The yellow muddy ground seemed to create a terrible wave of earth as it rippled away from his foot. Yu Tianchen's fist crashed onto the 7th war drum, just to be welcomed back as a hero by a beautiful woman. Continued Yu Tianchen in his deep singing voice. Finally, he had run out of air from his first breath. A cracking sound emerged in the atmosphere as the 7th war drum was smashed into 5 pieces. Lords and nobles wearing armor and inspiring ambitions. A hot-blooded man surrounded by lakes and mountains. The people in the crowd were listening to these words while looking at that handsome young man. Their hearts were pounding, and it seemed like the blood in their veins had been ignited with the passion for battle. The officers and soldiers were especially enthusiastic and excited. Each and every single one of them had excitement in their eyes as if they were seeing themselves as the man from the song. All right, all the people of the holy courtyard were supporting Yu Tianchen. On his seat, Duan Tianlang was slightly smiling as well and said, Yu Tianchen deserves to be a member of the Yu clan. His heart is filled with great aspirations. Relying on a single breath, he was able to chant and at the same time make 7 drums beat. Such people are a rarity. He would be a perfect match for the princess. He had required only 1 breath to sing his song and make 7 war drums beat. Yu Tianchen hadn't paused for even a moment. He had been singing heartily as he attacked the war drums. It required much more energy than just attacking. After all, he only had a single breath. Yu Tianchen turned around and slightly nodded towards Duan Tianlang. Immediately after, he walked towards Duan Xinyi and warmly smiled at her. Duan Xinyi also smiled in response while remaining as silent as before. Not bad, said Duan Wu Ya while smiling and nodding. I wouldn't have thought that Brother Yu was as talented as he was creative. That is, indeed, very rare. I am just some nobody. Your Highness, you're flattering me, said Yu Tianchen with a proud smile on his face. He then immediately glanced towards Lin Feng. In his eyes, perhaps Lin Feng had already become a potential rival. To be more accurate, you are not even some nobody. You are even lower. You are a piece of shit, said a loud voice with a cold and indifferent tone. The crowd was astonished. A piece of shit? Then everybody turned towards the person who was speaking. It was precisely Lin Feng. That guy. How audacious, thought the crowd. When he heard those words, Yu Tianchen narrowed his eyes and coldly looked at Lin Feng. He smiled coldly and said, all right, if I'm a piece of shit, would you want to try? That's exactly what I was planning, said Lin Feng while smiling indifferently. In the continent of the 9 clouds, many people were much stronger than him, but Lin Feng was probably one of the most creative people. Lin Feng stood up and started walking slowly towards the drums. He arrived in front of the war drums. The crowd was stupefied. Lin Feng was serious about trying to beat 7 drums. The crowd was already growing impatient. They wanted to see how strong and talented Lin Feng was. However, being stronger than Yu Tianchen wasn't very likely. Duan Wu Ya and Duan Xinyi were impatiently looking at Lin Feng, wondering what his plan was. I want to see if you can make 7 drums beat while singing, said Yu Tianchen while smiling coldly. He was fixedly staring at Lin Feng. It was impossible for Lin Feng to beat him. He would just end up humiliating himself. Lin Feng closed his eyes and took a deep breath. A beautiful melody suddenly came from his mouth. The crowd was shocked as their hearts started to race with excitement. Chapter 196. Lin Feng's Song. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. The sound of his solemn and serene voice could be heard as he took a few steps forward. With piercingly cold sword chi around his body, he punched the first war drum and immediately annihilated it without leaving a single trace. It was only his first attack, and the crowd was already stupefied. What powerful sword chi! Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. Lin Feng's loud and melodious voice resonated in the people's ears. That song had caused them to imagine a hero holding his sword, in a towering enrage on the battlefield. Boom! Another war drum was also destroyed without leaving trace. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. The young man's hair turns white, he is filled with sorrow. Continued Lin Feng and was unceasingly moving through the war drums. At this point, he had already destroyed 4 war drums, making them beat. He hadn't even used much of the breath he had taken. He was unceasingly moving. His voice was getting louder and was filled with emotion. The humiliation of Duan Ren. When the officials hate, they destroy. On the back of the armored horses, going to the mountains armed with flowers. Boom! The 5th war drum was smashed and disappeared as dust in the atmosphere. At that moment, the sword energy around Lin Feng's body seemed as vast the sky, the earth and the clouds. It was in perfect harmony with his song, as if it could annihilate an entire country. At the same time, an insane amount of sword force filled the air. It seemed like it was impossible to stop that force from increasing. It was surrounding the entire crowd. With magnificent ideals in my mind yet starvation filling my stomach, I eat their flesh. To settle my thirst, I drink their blood. Lin Feng's hand seemed to transform into a sword. It was followed by an incredible amount of force. He easily destroyed the 6th war drum. People's hearts were pounding. He had already destroyed 6 war drums. Clearing from the beginning until the end, the mountains and lakes, moving towards the heavens. The lyrics of his song were extremely presumptuous and seemed to be challenging the heavens. Around the body of that arrogant young man was an endless burning brilliance which was emerging into the atmosphere. His fist, which looked more like a sword, moved through the air and its incredible white glow crashed onto the 7th war drum, which was smashed into pieces again and disappeared without leaving trace. That young man looked incredibly natural and unrestrained. At that moment, Lin Feng finally stopped moving. His clothes and long hair were fluttering in the air. He looked frivolous, natural and unrestrained. His beautiful song was resonating in people's minds over and over. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. The young man's hair turns white. He is filled with sorrow. The humiliation of Duan Ren. When the officials hate, they destroy. On the back of the armored horses, going to the mountains armed with flowers. With magnificent ideals in my mind yet starvation filling my stomach, I eat their flesh. To settle my thirst, I drink their blood. Clearing from the beginning until the end, the mountains and lakes, moving towards the heavens. With such inspiring and exciting lyrics, Lin Feng had risen to the heavens. He was heroic. In comparison, the song that Yu Tian Chen had sung a moment before was, indeed, nothing compared to this. Compared with Lin Feng, he actually seemed like a nobody. Everybody looked calm and solemn, but their passion had been ignited. All right, said Duan Wu Ya while standing up. His expression looked sharp. Such a singing talent was rare, especially coming from a teenager. In comparison with Lin Feng, Yu Tian Chen had no artistic talent at all. At that moment, he just had the feeling that he was a buffoon trying to amuse Princess Duan Xin Yi. Lin Feng had the spirit and composure of a hero. Duan Xin Yi's beautiful eyes were twinkling. Her facial expression was resplendent. Surprisingly, Lin Feng could sing in such a marvelous way. Everybody, no matter if they were from the holy courtyard of Shuiyu or the Celestial Academy, remained silent and was looking at that unconventional young man. The images of Lin Feng singing were replaying in their minds. At that moment, only Yu Tian Chen had a hideous facial expression on his face. He had lost. That was a crushing defeat. He had lost in both the artistic and strength. It was really a crushing defeat. No need to talk about their artistic talent, but as far as their strength was concerned, they had both made 7 drums beat and had both used only 1 breath. Besides, Lin Feng had sung longer and in a louder voice. Lin Feng had made the hearts of the crowd start to pound in their chests. The difficulty of Lin Feng's song was also higher. Besides, Lin Feng had not just broken the war drums, but he had disintegrated them into powder. He had used powerful sword energy to turn them into dust. From the first to the seventh war drum, they had all been disintegrated without leaving trace. Therefore, it was clear at first glance who had won and who had lost. A short time before, Yu Tianchen thought he was above everyone else, and at that moment, he was suffering a crushing defeat. The fact that he had been humiliating Lin Feng remained fresh in everybody's mind, but Lin Feng had also caused him to lose face. What Yu Tianchen couldn't stand at that moment is that Princess Duan Xinyi was staring at Lin Feng with her beautiful eyes. There was a splendor and radiance in her expression which didn't exist when she looked at other people. Duan Xinyi had also been enchanted by Lin Feng. Yu Tianchen couldn't allow such a thing to happen. Duan Xinyi was supposed to become his wife. That beautiful woman also possessed the power of a blood spirit. Yu Tianchen was determined to win. In the entire Shui Yu country, he had to be the one to win the princess's heart. Even though he hadn't won that battle, it didn't mean that he was weaker than Lin Feng. If used all his strength, Yu Tianchen was convinced that he was much stronger than Lin Feng. At that moment, Lin Feng finally moved. He slowly turned around and looked at Yu Tianchen. There was a densely sharp expression in Lin Feng's eyes. No matter if it is acquired on the path of cultivation, from being born into a noble family, or because of one's natural talent, only those who have a high social status can marry a princess. This is despicable, not knowing the vastness of the heavens because you overrate your strength. You think that you can marry the princess. That is truly the funniest thing in the world," said Lin Feng. Lin Feng paused and then continued in a cold tone. "You criticize me for my social status. I admit that I don't have a higher social status than you, but you also say that I am weak and a nobody. I would like to ask you a question. Apart from being born into a noble family, what else do you have? You do not know how large the world is. You are truly ignorant." Lin Feng's words were sharp and poignant, which made an ice-cold expression appear on Yu Tianchen's face. A family's social standing depends on your luck. You cannot change it. Cultivation is something you can change and create yourself. You can decide to become stronger and to improve your abilities, even if you don't have a high social status. If you decide to always surpass your own abilities, you can reach the clouds. I am sure that such people are not affected by their low social status anymore. Once they have reached the clouds, they despise those who, in the past, used to arrogantly look down on them. Only those who are that strong have the power to be arrogant. Lin Feng continued speaking. However, you are part of the other category, relying on your family's social standing. Besides, because you have a high social status, you think that you are true perfection. You are not brave and consider everyone else beneath you. You are only suited to being a big fish in a little pond. If you cannot break free from that way of thinking, then the best you can do is rely on the social standing granted to you by your clan. You are doomed. People will definitely surpass you. A clan with such people is doomed to decline and disappear sooner or later. When the people in the crowd heard Lin Feng's words, their hearts were racing. Those who didn't have a high social status had to be ambitious and brave. That's right, if they were determined to reach the clouds, sooner or later, they could. They would manage to surpass those who possessed everything in the continent. In the end, they would end up despising those who, in the past, despised them. Concerning the noble cultivators, they were dumbstruck after hearing what Lin Feng said. They didn't like to hear what Lin Feng was saying, but they had to admit that he was right. His analysis was extremely deep and precise. Besides, it was justified. Indeed, if they didn't bravely move forward, even if they had an illustrious status in a noble clan, sooner or later, their clan, with such useless people, would disappear. The crowd was amazed by Lin Feng's words. He was so young and could understand things so well. He was way too mysterious. That boy, even though he doesn't have a high social status, will have unlimited opportunities in the future," said Duan Wuya, who was starting to think that Lin Feng would actually really be a good match for his sister, Duan Xinyi. While the whole crowd was thinking about what Lin Feng had just said, Yu Tianchen's facial expression had reached the ultimate degree of ugliness. Even if everything that Lin Feng had said was justified and true, he had been saying all these things on an arrogant tone in front of everyone else, humiliated a member of the Yu clan. Chapter 197. Situation at the Gate. At that moment the crowd was looking towards Lin Feng and Yu Tianchen. A cold qi-filled atmosphere and the situation felt tense. Duan Wuya looked perplexed. He immediately stood up and said, "Okay. That's enough. Stop beating the drums. We should start heading off now. Lin Feng, you are in charge of the protection of the princess." When the crowd heard Duan Wuya, they were astonished. In the end, Duan Wuya had chosen Lin Feng. In his eyes, Lin Feng was more important than a young prodigy of the Yu clan. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. After all, they had not seen what happened in the lovesick forest. In other people's eyes, Lin Feng was just Lin Feng. Even though he was outstanding, it was impossible for him to compete with a young prodigy from a noble clan. The crowd had the impression that Duan Wuya had given him the opportunity, even though it was undeserved simply because he liked Lin Feng. Lin Feng was also astonished. Actually, if Yu Tianchen hadn't made him angry and attempted to humiliate him, Lin Feng wouldn't have necessarily stood up. Even though the princess gave him a good impression, he still didn't have any feelings for her. It was because of her delicate facial features and general beauty. No man could find her disgusting. "Uncle Duan, even though I assigned Lin Feng to protect the princess, the others can also participate," said Duan Wuya to Duan Tianlang. He then immediately continued, "From now on, from all the members of the army, only the princess can give orders to Lin Feng. Lin Feng is also the person in charge of the princess's security. He can choose to achieve other military merits under his own decision. Besides, the whole army must help and assist Lin Feng if he requires it." When Duan Wuya finished talking, the crowd was astonished. Duan Wuya was giving incredible privileges to Lin Feng. "Duan Wuya is protecting me," thought Lin Feng. He immediately understood what Duan Wuya meant. Considering that Lin Feng's enemies were everywhere, Duan Wuya was worried that they would attempt to harm him. Therefore, he was giving a status to Lin Feng by making him the personal guard of the princess. Besides, he was reminding everybody else that attacking Lin Feng was the same as endangering the princess. "Lin Feng, did you hear me?" said Duan Wuya while looking at Lin Feng in a cold and indifferent tone. This time, there was no warmth or friendliness in his voice. There was only the might and power which made him sound like an emperor. "Roger," said Lin Feng while slightly nodding. Lin Feng obviously couldn't refuse protecting the princess. "All right, the princess's security is in your hands," said Duan Wuya while looking at Lin Feng with a profound look. He immediately looked towards Duan Tianlang and said, "Uncle, the troops are now under your control. When you arrive in Duanren City, please cooperate with General Liu Kanglan to fight against the enemy. I will be waiting in the Imperial City for you to return triumphant. See you then, Your Highness. I will spare no effort to defeat Mo Yu and prevent Duanren City from being humiliated," replied Duan Tianlang in a calm and solemn tone. Duan Wuya slightly nodded, glanced at Duan Xinyi, then turned around and left without a shred of hesitation. Duan Tianlang went back to his seat. His pitch-black armor looked majestic. He glanced at the crowd and said, "Troops, back to your initial positions." The bronze-armored soldiers quickly moved the war drums away. The people of the Holy Courtyard of Shuiyu and of the Celestial Academy stood up. Among the troops, obedience to the chief commander was absolute. Yu Tianchen coldly glanced at Lin Feng with killing intent filling his eyes. Immediately after, he turned around and moved back to his seat. When Lin Feng noticed Yu Tianchen's hostile behavior, he secretly smiled coldly and said, "I hope that you will not continue to provoke me." Then, Lin Feng turned around and walked towards the members of the Celestial Academy. Lin Feng. At that moment, Duan Tianlang shouted and called out to Lin Feng, which surprised him. He then turned his head around. "You're going to the wrong place," said Duan Tianlang indifferently, and then added, "Now, you are the personal guard of the princess. You should always be at her side with the troops. How negligent are you? If anything happens to the princess, you will be held responsible." Lin Feng narrowed his eyes. Now that Duan Wuya had left, Duan Tianlang was starting to put pressure on Lin Feng. However, Lin Feng couldn't refute Duan Tianlang's argument. "I made a mistake," said Lin Feng while smiling indifferently, and then adjusted his trajectory to walk towards the princess. Duan Tianlang was the chief commander of the army and was able to put pressure on Lin Feng. Lin Feng had to be careful not to give Duan Tianlang any reason to do so. "Sorry for bringing you trouble," said Duan Xinyi when she saw that Lin Feng was walking towards her. She had a warm and tender smile on her face. She was extremely beautiful. "It is an honor to be in charge of the princess's safety," said Lin Feng politely while smiling. Duan Xinyi looked at Lin Feng and blinked twice. She then snorted with laughter while saying, "Lin Feng, how come I have the feeling that you had to force that? It doesn't seem like you." When Lin Feng saw her magnificent smile, he was stupefied. He immediately shrugged and smiled. He looked like he felt at ease. "What a pervert," said a voice from behind Lin Feng. He had the sensation that someone was staring at him. He turned around and saw Lu Fei, who was glaring at him with evil eyes, which surprised him. That girl, was she jealous? Lin Feng then looked at Meng Qian. She looked cold and detached like always. She wasn't looking at Lin Feng. How could this girl be so cold? When Duan Tianlang saw that everybody had gone back to their initial positions, he glanced at the crowd and said in a very loud voice, "Troops, let's head to battle." "Let's go," shouted the several thousand troops. Immediately after, the ground was shaking from so many people moving towards Duanren City. A few days later, a huge dust cloud covered the horizon. Thousands of troops were riding their horses on an ancient road. From above, their formation looked like a dragon's tail. There was a huge cloud of dust trailing behind them. At the very front were two horses ridden by Lin Feng and Princess Duan Xinyi. It had been her decision to ride a horse at the front with everybody else instead of sitting inside a carriage. She had given up her usual comfort and joined the soldiers. Of course, in the world of cultivation, there were very few people who were pampered and spoilt even when it came to women. Cultivators could ride a horse over huge distances, for many days without rest, and it was considered normal. They would only be slightly tired, nothing more. The evening sun was on the horizon in the west. The sunlight coupled with the rosy clouds offered a splendid view. In the distance, there was an old and simple city. Above the city, the evening sun was slowly setting. It was quiet and tranquil. A small breeze was blowing through it, which gave it a desolate impression. Duanren City. The troops finally arrived in Duanren City, but the gate was firmly closed. The people in the city looked cold and remained motionless. Chief Commander Duan Tianlang has arrived. Hurry and open the city gate, shouted some troops towards the people on the gate while raising their banner. The people at the gate looked cold and indifferent. They glanced at the troops and one of them said, "Except for when the general gives us the order, we will not open the gate." What? The troops were stupefied when they heard them. They wouldn't open the gate? A soldier furiously shouted, "We are the Imperial City troops, here with the Chief Commander Duan Tianlang. The Emperor has given us the order to come. I order you to open the gate and let us in. Only the general can give us an order," said the person as coldly as before. They didn't listen to anyone's orders apart from those given by their general. Duan City was under the control of General Liu Kanglan. Apart from him, nobody else could give orders to his troops. Liu Kanglan, how audacious. It seems like he is not attaching importance to the imperial city troops, said Duan Tianlang coldly before adding, does he think that he has the highest social status in the country or what? When the crowd heard what Duan Tianlang was saying about Liu Kanglan, they started whispering all sorts of comments, and at that moment Lin Feng smiled coldly and said, what Duan Tianlang is saying is impossible. He perfectly knows how strong we are, but the fact that his people are not opening the gate until he gives them the order proves that he knows what he is doing. He taught them perfect military discipline. Besides, why do you say that he thinks his social status is higher than anyone in the country? When Duan Tianlang heard Lin Feng, he was stupefied. He coldly looked at Lin Feng and said, what do you think gives you the right to intervene in my conversation? What do you intend to do? You, Duan Tianlang, are wrong. At the moment, I am the princess's personal guard. I will spare no effort to fulfill my duty. What you just said could have very serious consequences to the extent that it could trigger a mutiny. If something happened to the princess during such a mutiny, you would have to bear responsibility. Lin Feng was fixedly staring at Duan Tianlang, sounding neither lofty nor humble. Chapter 198, Invasion. Shut your mouth, shouted Duan Tianlang, and then said coldly, you have the gift when it comes to speech and enjoy babbling nonsense. Don't think that because you are the princess's personal guard you can act however you wish. The military has rules. Why don't you shut your mouth? I, Lin Feng, have come to Duan City to help. I never said that I wanted to give orders to the troops. I am doing exactly what the second prince has asked me to do. I will stay next to the princess and protect her. What gives you the right to give me orders? I am not your subordinate. Lin Feng shouted with the same tone as Duan Tianlang. He had a cold smile on his face. They had already arrived in Duan City. Why did he need to fear Duan Tianlang? When Duan Tianlang heard Lin Feng, he narrowed his eyes. He looked cold and murderous. In Duan Tianlang's eyes, Lin Feng was part of his army. Even if he was the princess's personal guard, Duan Tianlang still thought that he could play with Lin Feng as he wished. He hadn't thought that Lin Feng was going to contradict him in front of all the troops. What an insanely audacious guy. At that moment, the crowd was also dumbstruck. They were blankly staring at Lin Feng. That guy was really insane. He surprisingly dared contradict his superior, the chief commander, Uncle Duan Tianlang. What Lin Feng said is true. When the people of Duan City see a military force that overwhelms them with numbers of unknown origin, they must adhere strictly to what they have been told and not open the gate. That is precisely why General Liu Kanglan has ordered them not to act without his orders, and his methods are correct. What you are saying is inappropriate, said Duan Xinyi, surprisingly defending Lin Feng. Everybody was astonished. Under his helmet, Duan Tianlang's eyes revealed a cold expression. He then said indifferently, Princess, Your Highness, before discussing whether what I say is appropriate or not, considering the outrageous words Lin Feng has said, I first want to punish him. Punish me? You want to punish me? Said Lin Feng while smiling coldly. At that moment, Lin Feng already understood that Duan Tianlang and the second prince were not on the same wavelength at all. If anyone wanted to attack Lin Feng, they wouldn't act because of Duan Wu Ya. He had said in front of the entire army that the princess was Lin Feng's only superior. Not obeying military orders can classify as treason and insubordination, which is an act that must be punished. Said Duan Tianlang. Treason and insubordination? Lin Feng was staring at Duan Tianlang. What do you intend to do to me? I don't want to make the princess lose face, so I will not kill you. However, I will make your life a sheer hell and confine you to a prison. Then, I will talk with His Majesty and your destiny will be in his hands. Ridiculous, said Lin Feng with an indifferent attitude. Immediately after, he looked at Duan Xinyi and said, Princess, it is not that I don't want to protect you. It is just that Duan Tian Lang doesn't want to let me do it properly. I am leaving. Lin Feng urged his dragon colt horse away using the spurs while saying, anyone who wants to come with me is free to do so. I am curious to see who will dare to go with you, said Duan Tian Lang with a cold smile on his face. That guy was extremely audacious. Did he really want to die? But when Duan Tian Lang finished his sentence, a great deal of people started moving towards Lin Feng. Meng Qing, Lu Fei, Wen Ao Shui, Yuan Shan, Duan Feng, etc. There was even He Mo, followed by 32 men wearing bronze masks. A huge group of people had come out to follow Lin Feng. Duan Tian Lang was astonished. He was wondering, since when did Lin Feng have so many companions? Princess, it's not that I am not willing to protect you, but Duan Tian Lang is trying to avenge his wrongs using his current title and doesn't allow me to protect you. Please take good care of yourself. Immediately after, Lin Feng left and galloped towards the city gate at full speed. Everybody else was blankly staring at Lin Feng. The others were closely following him, which made the people in the crowd completely shocked. Kill them, shouted Duan Tian Lang coldly. Danger was imminent. Someone behind him took out an arrow and put it in his bow. Lin Feng was stupefied. Cold energy was released from his body, but as before, he continued galloping forwards. He was ready to fight, but still continued towards the city gate. Stop! A furious shout filled the air. That voice belonged to the soft and tender Duan Xin Yi. Princess, Your Highness, they are soldiers. If they disobey their orders, they must die, said Duan Tian Lang coldly while staring at Duan Xin Yi. A general in the field is not bound by the orders from his sovereign. That was particularly true in the case of Duan Tian Lang. Once he left the imperial city, Duan Tian Lang was already ignoring Duan Wu Ya's orders and wanted to kill Lin Feng and his friends. How bold, thought the crowd. Yu Tian Chen and the others were smiling. What they didn't dare to do, Duan Tian Lang was going to do it for them. Orders? Said Duan Xin Yi looking cold. She wouldn't have thought that Duan Tian Lang could be that audacious. Today, whoever fires an arrow, I will kill you on the spot. We will see if Duan Tian Lang or anyone else will dare to stop me, shouted Princess Duan Xin Yi coldly. Everyone was astonished and felt extremely awkward. Indeed, if Duan Xin Yi wanted to try and kill them, even if they wanted to fight back, they wouldn't. If they injured the princess, they were convinced that Duan Tian Lang wouldn't hesitate to kill them. Duan Xin Yi and Lin Feng were not the same. She was the princess and her social status was extremely high. Duan Tian Lang may have been very audacious, but he would never dare cause harm to the princess. Duan Tian Lang was stupefied. He wouldn't have thought that the princess would help Lin Feng to such a degree. In a short time, Lin Feng and his friends were already far away from the army and were very close to the entrance into Duan Ren City. At that moment, even if an arrow touched them, it would not cause them much damage. I am Lin Feng. Brothers, could you please open the gate? Sorry for the inconvenience. Lin Feng shouted these words to the soldiers at the top of the gate. These people could clearly see Lin Feng's face, and they smiled at him and said, "It's young master Lin Feng, open the gate." "Lin Feng, young master, is Shu okay?" said the soldiers on the top of the gate. At that moment, Lu Fei took off her helmet and her beautiful face appeared. "Shu, you came back," said a soldier, looking excited. At that moment, a rumbling noise spread through the air. Lin Feng and the others urged their horses forwards and entered the city. This scene made the soldiers on the horizon look at each other in dismay. They didn't understand. They had come because of orders from the imperial clan. Even Duan Tian Lang had joined them, but the city still would not open the gates for them. "They are really audacious, General. Should we attempt to take the gate?" suggested someone behind Duan Tian Lang. Amongst them were many strong cultivators of the Ling Qi layer. The gate wasn't that high, so it was easy for them to jump onto it. Destroying the gate would have looked like the city was being besieged. If given the order, they would fight to death against Duan Tian Lang's enemies. Duan Tian Lang turned around and looked at the person with a sharp gaze. I came here to cooperate with Liu Kanglan and defeat our common enemy. Do you want me to provoke them and cause trouble? Get the hell away from me. Indeed, General, said that person when they heard Duan Tian Lang's furious shout. They then moved away. The troops were furious and agitated. How disgusting. They had come to help Liu Kanglan fight the enemy, but they were blocked at the gate of the city. The good opinion they had of Liu Kanglan vanished. They didn't understand why Duan Tian Lang was accepting such a humiliation. At that moment, Lin Feng and the others were in Duanren City and noticed that the city was calm and in perfect order. There wasn't the slightest bit of chaos. At the same time, Liu Kanglan appeared. He was taking a stroll through the city. Lin Feng, Fei Fei, you're here. Uncle Liu, shouted Lin Feng, but he was only surprised and bewildered. He was staring at the distance. Lin Feng, are you wondering why Duanren City is so peaceful and why I don't let them come into the city? Said Liu Kanglan as if he could read Lin Feng's thoughts. Please enlighten me with your explanations, said Lin Feng without admitting it. Liu Kanglan smiled wryly and said, Lin Feng, I will definitely let you know my reasoning. You came to help us fight against Mo Yu country because they were invading us and we urgently needed help, right? Could it be that is not the case? Lin Feng, when he heard Liu Kanglan's words, narrowed his eyes as if he was realizing something. Liu Kanglan was smiling wryly and had a piercingly cold expression within his smile. Duanren City is very calm. It isn't in danger at all. They haven't come to help us, but rather to seize the power. The Imperial City can't stand it anymore and has decided to attack me. Chapter 199. The Calm Before the Storm. Lin Feng was dumbstruck. A short moment after, he took a deep breath. Oh my God, whispered Lin Feng. He thought that he had truly been tricked. He had really believed that Duanren City was in a critical situation. The imperial family was really hard to understand sometimes. They were living in two different worlds. For power and influence, there was nothing they wouldn't dare to do. They wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice other people. Are you going to let them wait outside this entire time? Asked Lin Feng. Liu Kanglan smiled coldly and said, since I already knew their plans, invading my city without fighting is impossible. I want to see how they intend to seize my city as long as it's under my control. But Lin Feng, you shouldn't have come here with Fei Fei. It's a bad situation, said Liu Kanglan with a wry smile on his face. In the past, he had asked Lin Feng to take Liu Fei with him because he didn't want them to get caught in such a situation. He hadn't thought that they would come back at the worst possible time. Since you're already here, you cannot escape now. Lin Feng shrugged without paying attention and just smiled. All right, let's go to the mansion, said Liu Kanglan said while shaking his head and smiling wryly. He was astonished by the crowd following Lin Feng. Each and every single one of them looked like a deity and released a fine qi. They were all very strong, especially the girl wearing a fine veil. She was releasing a pure qi. Liu Kanglan found her very mysterious. Fei Fei, was Lin Feng good to you? Asked Liu Kanglan on the tone of a joke while looking at Liu Fei. Father, said Liu Fei while looking at her father. She then immediately looked at Lin Feng and said, Lin Feng chose to be the princess's personal guard. It is a very big problem. Arg, Lin Feng was stunned. That girl was really vicious. The princess's personal guard? Whispered Liu Kanglan astonished. Father, you also don't know that Lin Feng in the Imperial City. Lin Feng befriended the second prince and that the princess thinks highly of him. The second prince even asked Lin Feng to take care of the princess. When Lin Feng heard Liu Fei's vivid explanations, he couldn't help but had the feeling that he had done something bad and offended his father-in-law. Lin Feng, said Liu Kanglan when he heard that Liu Fei was jealous. That guy was quite impressive. Lu Fei was already jealous of others. Uncle Lu, actually, I think that Lu Fei is more beautiful than the princess, said Lin Feng shamelessly and continued. But it's just that Lu Fei continues to refuse when I ask for her to sleep with me. Lin Feng was forcing a smile while talking. Everybody around him was dumbstruck and looking at him with their eyes wide open in shock. At that moment, Lu Kanglan was astonished. Besides, Lu Fei knitted her brows and looked at Lin Feng in a furious way. She then said, "You perverted bastard. Have I ever acted perverted, Fei Fei? You cannot lie in the presence of Uncle Lu. If I have ever been perverted with you, tell Uncle Lu about it," said Lin Feng in a decent way. Lu Fei almost fainted. That guy was really shameless. Lu Kanglan was speechless as well. Immediately after, he burst into laughter so hard that tears ran down his face. He then fixedly stared at Lin Feng. It seemed like Lin Feng could make use of any situation. Everybody else was astonished and looking at Lin Feng. How frivolous, unconventional, unrestrained and stubborn. He never reacted the way that people expected, and his teasing Lu Fei was very comical. His personality at that moment and when he was fighting was completely different, as if he was a different person. The group all continued until they entered Lu Kanglan's private mansion. Lu Kanglan gave them a comfortable place to stay. However, Lu Kanglan continued to leave Duan Tianlang and the others outside of the city and ignored them. Duan Tianlang didn't cause trouble either. He calmly stayed with his troops outside of the city. 3 days later, Lu Kanglan, Lin Feng and the others were having a meal when some shocking news arrived. A sentinel came to inform them that the Prince of Mo Yu, Mo Jia, was 500 kilometers away from Duan-Ren border with his army. Considering their speed, the troops would only need 2 days to arrive in Duan-Ren border. Lin Feng was surprised and looked at Lu Kanglan. Lu Kanglan's nickname was the Divine Arrow, and his troops considered him as a deity and knew he was incredibly strong. However, when he heard that news, he lost his calm and stood up. The news was obviously very shocking. Lu Kanglan was stupefied and looking at Lin Feng and the others. He then slowly sat back down and said, "Mo Jia, the Prince of Mo Yu, is 17 years old. He is a true genius. He is so young and has already broken through to the 9th Ling Qi layer. He will soon break through to the Zan Qi layer. Besides, he is equally as intelligent. It is said that when he gets involved in a war, he is invincible." Lin Feng and the others were stupefied. 17 years old and had the strength of the 9th Ling Qi layer. That was indeed terrifying. He was much stronger than some of the high officials of Shui Yu. Besides, that 17-year-old young man had never lost on the battlefield. "Father, you have never lost either, and you participated in many battles," said Lu Fei. The crowd was silently nodding. Lu Kanglan, the Divine Arrow, was famous. He had been accumulating victories over a great number of years. "I am not worried about that. Apart from his strength, he is also very important within the Mo Yu country. If he gets involved in the fight, the country will use all their strength. The first reason is that they want to ensure his security, and the second reason is prestige. Mo Jia is the symbol of the strength for their country. Therefore, that fight will be horrible for us." Lu Kanglan's face firmly wrinkled. There were troubles inside and outside of their country. Inside of the Shui Yu country, the emperor didn't trust him and meant him harm, while outside, the Mo Yu country wanted to invade them and had deployed all their forces. There was a huge crisis in Shui Yu. At that moment, Lu Kanglan stood up and said, "You can continue to eat. I'm going to the city gate to have a look." Lin Feng was stupefied. He understood what Lu Kanglan was saying. He wanted to let Duan Tianlang enter the city and go fight the enemy together. No wonder he has such a high reputation. He is extremely wise as well as strong, thought the crowd. He knew that Duan Tianlang had come to seize his city, but he would let him enter to fight against Mo Jia on his side. That was a very difficult decision to make for an ordinary person. The Prince of Mo Yu, Mo Jia, whispered Lin Feng. It seemed that this time, the Mo Yu country was turning out in force and was ready to attack. It seemed like a great calamity. Lin Feng hadn't thought that he would go through such things. "I'm coming too," said Lin Feng at that moment while standing up and then walking towards Lu Kang land. Everybody was stupefied and suddenly followed Lin Feng. At that moment, in the middle of the city, it was still very peaceful and calm. Since Lu Kang land was in the city, nothing ever happened there. However, the calm in the city felt like the calm before a storm. The smell of war was moving closer. Chapter 200. The Dual Spirit. Outside of Duanren, only hills and valleys could be seen over the boundless distance. That area was covered with dust blowing in the wind. In that remote area, white tents were erected everywhere which looked like a small city. The troops stationed there all belonged to the Shui Yu country. Duanren border was the only way to reach Duanren city. Besides, Duantian border was just a huge valley. From Duanren city, there was a panoramic view of the valley, so if enemies came, they could easily spot them with a glance. Therefore, Lu Kang land couldn't let the troops of Mo Yu enter Duanren border that easily. He had troops guarding the outer border. Except for critical situations, his troops normally wouldn't go to Duanren border. At that moment, Lin Feng and Lu Kang land were together above the city gate of Duanren city. They were looking at Duantian Lang and his troops. They had passed through Duanren city and were heading towards the border. Lu Kang land had eventually allowed Duantian Lang to come into Duanren city, but there was only one condition. He and his troops were not allowed to stay in Duanren city. They had to leave immediately and go to Duanren border and establish their military camp. They had to stay there and defend in case of attack. Duantian Lang had accepted those conditions. Once inside Duanren city, he had surprisingly continued and moved towards Duanren border. "Lin Feng, let's go to the campsite," said Lu Kang lan indifferently when he saw that the troops were moving to the Duanren border. Lin Feng slightly nodded, and they immediately went down the stairs and headed towards the Duanren border. In Duanren border, there were countless old broken weapons on the ground. While walking through the valley, the wind was howling. Immediately after, coldness invaded Lin Feng's body, started in the legs and then spreading to the rest of his body. Lin Feng's heart started beating a bit faster. There were so many weapons covering the ground in Duanren border. They had all been broken during the war and their owners had all died on the battlefield. Those days, Duanren border was a sea of broken weapons which diffused a cold energy like mist across the ground. Lin Feng inhaled a deep breath. He looked calm and solemn, but his heart was trembling. It was impossible for anyone to look at such a scene and not be touched. They walked to the other side of Duanren border where there was a precipice. Lin Feng gazed into the distance and thought that the cliffs were incredibly beautiful, but he was still aware that danger lurked there. Lu Kang land could easily take advantage of the landscape. Even though there was no imminent danger at the moment, as before, Lin Feng felt an oppressive cold chi while walking in the valley. Only after having entirely passed through it could Lin Feng relax. There were tents as far as Lin Feng's eyes could see. At that moment, he took a very deep breath and said, "Uncle Lu, how many troops are there here?" 300,000, replied Lu Kang lan indifferently. In the continent of the Nine Clouds, amongst cultivators, there weren't many who were willing to join the army. Otherwise, 300,000 stationed troops were a trivial number considering that the Shui Yu country had billions of people. The Mo Yu country was entirely unified under their emperor. There weren't any sects, which had influence. In their country, they always say, a single army is stronger. Amongst the 9 other countries of Shui Yu, their army was considered as one of the strongest. They had over 3 million troops. They always had ambitions to conquer the other countries. Shui Yu and Mo Yu were neighbors, so Mo Yu wanted to take the initiative to invade. The Sentinels have reported that this time, the Mo Yu army has over 500,000 troops. said Liu Kang Lan indifferently. Lin Feng was astonished. That meant 200,000 more than them. That was a terrifying amount. Duan Tianlang also brought 100,000 troops. If he wholeheartedly cooperates with me, the Mo Yu country is far from being able to invade us. Our geographical position is very advantageous. The opponents may have 500,000 troops, but if Duan Tianlang and I manage to efficiently cooperate, then the terrain advantage will make it too difficult for them to invade, said Liu Kang Lan. There wasn't much hope, but Liu Kang Lan had high expectations. The soldiers on the Kai Xie armored horses were rigorously protecting the campsite. The best soldiers were there. Liu Kang Lan and Lin Feng arrived on the campsite and said, "Make Han Man and Po Jun come to my tent." "Roger, General," said an officer. A short time after, two silhouettes entered the tent. The one leading them was a robust young man. His face was well proportioned according to his body. He looked determined and strict. These two people were both wearing red armor. Only their eyes, which contained a golden light, were visible. The two people moved into the tent. They were about to salute Liu Kang Lan, but when they saw Lin Feng, they were dumbstruck. Immediately after, inside his armor, a wholehearted smile appeared on the face of the robust man. "Lin Feng, big brother." Han Man rushed over to tightly hug Lin Feng. Behind him, Po Jun was also smiling warmly. No sharp chi was being released from his body, but he was as full of vitality. "Lin Feng, you guys can chat. I am going to see Duan Tianlang as he settles down," said Liu Kang Lan with a warm and soft smile on his face. Immediately after, he left the tent, leaving Lin Feng and his friends alone. "Han Man, Po Jun, are you getting used to this place?" asked Lin Feng. "We are used to it. Lin Feng, big brother, Po Jun and I are now controlling elite troops. The general has put them under our control. They are all very strong and all have an outstanding background." Han Man's voice was filled with pride. He hadn't been there for a very long time and already had 1,000 troops under his control. To achieve this, he had only relied on his own efforts. Liu Kang Lan wasn't the type of person who gave privileges to people because he was friendly with them, but he knew how to recognize people's natural talents. "Have you been in many dangerous situations?" Lin Feng didn't really care about what his two friends had accomplished. He was more concerned with their safety. "We haven't been in many dangerous situations. Po Jun and I have broken through to the 4th Ling Chi layer," said Han Man while smiling proudly, making Po Jun smile wryly. "Lin Feng, brother, Han Man has become a monster. There were some enemies waiting in an ambush outside of the country. In the end, he ended up fighting against 2 strong cultivators of the 5th Ling Chi layer and slaughtered them as well as all the rest of their members. His spirit has awakened, and it provides him with endless strength. However, when he killed them, his body was completely wrecked by the time the battle was over. Alone, he killed 2 cultivators of the 5th Ling Chi layer as well as all the other people?" Lin Feng's pupils shrank. He was pleasantly surprised. Besides, Han Man had just broken through to the 5th Ling Chi layer. Han Man scratched his head with a shy smile on his face. He then said, "I don't know what happened either. Since my spirit awakened, it seems like I am able to fuse with the earth and absorb its strength to make it my own. With this power, killing these 2 cultivators of the 5th Ling Chi layer wasn't too difficult. Could it be a blood spirit?" thought Lin Feng. When Han Man was at the prisoner arena, his spirit had awakened once already when he broke through to the Ling Chi layer. It was obviously different than a normal spirit as it had awakened a second time. "Lin Feng, Po Jun speaks highly of me, but he's also been hiding things from us. He is also able to defeat cultivators of the 5th Ling Chi layer," said Han Man, which made Lin Feng stupefied. Po Jun was also able to defeat cultivators of the 5th Ling Chi layer. "Be honest and explain these things to Lin Feng yourself," said Han Man while glancing at Po Jun. Po Jun shook his head while smiling and immediately walked towards Lin Feng. "Lin Feng, big brother, take a look." While speaking, Po Jun stretched his hand and a vine slowly emerged. It looked like an illusion but was real. When it reached Lin Feng's body, Lin Feng could feel that it was solid. That was Po Jun's vine spirit, which he could use to attack people by surprise. But at that moment, a sharp energy suddenly emerged from Po Jun's body. His pupils suddenly became dark and looked piercingly sharp. A black illusion suddenly slowly emerged from his back. In the middle of that illusion, a long black spear was floating and was pointing towards the vault of heaven. Dual spirit. Lin Feng's pupils shrank. That was another spirit. Po Jun had a dual spirit. The vine spirit and the illusionary spear vanished in the blink of an eye. Po Jun was smiling indifferently. His dual spirit was his most powerful trump card. He even hid it from Han Man for a while. Awesome. A dual spirit Po Jun. You and Han Man are the same. You are both geniuses. No wonder when I first met you, the expression in your eyes looked so sharp. Lin Feng was smiling wholeheartedly. His two good friends were amazingly strong, which made him very happy. Han Man's spirit had been awakened a second time, which probably meant he possessed a blood spirit, and Po Jun surprisingly had a dual spirit, which was extremely rare. Having a dual spirit is no big deal, especially when you have a big slave mark on your face. It's as if I already died long ago in the prisoner arena, said Po Jun while sighing. Lin Feng looked at Po Jun and said, Po Jun, don't worry about that mark on your face. Sooner or later, I will help you remove it. Every drop of blood could go through a rebirth process on the path of cultivation. It was very easy to modify and alter the network of blood vessels. Therefore, removing that slave mark would be as easy as turning one's hand over. That's right, don't get depressed. We will get rid of these marks, sooner or later, said Han Man while smiling, and continued, Lin Feng, let's go for a walk. I will tell you more about the other troops and the current situation. All right, Lin Feng nodded, and immediately after, the three friends left the tent. They walked towards the troops outside of the tent. Po Jun said, Lin Feng, big brother, amongst the troops, there are different categories. The guards, the sergeants, the lieutenants, the non-commissioned officers, and the officers. The guards have 10 soldiers under their control. The sergeants have 10 guards, and therefore indirectly 100 soldiers, under their control. The lieutenants, which Po Jun and I are, have 10 sergeants under their control and indirectly control all of their soldiers, which is 1,000 in total. Even higher in the ranks, there are the non-commissioned officers who control 10 lieutenants and therefore 10,000 soldiers. Our troops are composed of a total of 300,000 soldiers. Excluding General Liu Kanglan, there are 3 officers divided into a left, right and middle. Besides, each officer has 10 non-commissioned officers under their control. Besides, there are also the Kai Xie armored troops with special commanders. Po Jun and I are part of that category. Lin Feng understood how the military ranks worked. The hierarchy was strict. It didn't differ much from the previous world. The lower ranked had to execute the orders given by the higher ranked. End of chapters.